I'm Richard Thaler, the president-elect of the American Economic Association. There are many misconceptions people have about economists and the field they study. Many think that economics is studied exclusively by old white men and is mostly boring. I organized this session to try and dispel this myth. I will be the only old white man you will see in this session, and I promise you the research you will hear will be anything but boring. The first speaker who will prove that is Katie Milkman from the University of Pennsylvania. One of Katie's knacks is for finding and creating unique data sets that illustrate human behavior, which she's been doing since she was an undergrad at Princeton. Her senior thesis was what gets published in the New Yorker and was, of course, picked up by the New Yorker. Of course, she knew that was going to happen. Later on, she studied what makes certain New York Times articles skyrocket to the most read list. You can, for a suitable fee, she'll tell you how to do that. More recently, her audit study on finding academic mentors was widely discussed among seminar and dinner tables, especially among grad students. After graduating from Princeton, Katie went to the Harvard Business School doctoral program in computer science and business, now teaches at Wharton. As you'll hear today, much of her recent research is about when our self-control fails or continues to fail us, but there's hope for our New Year's resolutions because Katie also studies how we might be able to overcome these failures with simple applications that individuals themselves or businesses might be able to leverage. The question is whether Katie also uses these techniques on the tennis court, where she was a former top junior player. Katie, it's all yours.
Thank you for that very kind introduction, Dick. And I do use these techniques myself, for sure. So I'm delighted to be a part of today's session on the topic of the undismal science, and excited to share some of my research about tackling temptation. I hope that by the end of today's session, you'll have some new ideas about how to avoid giving in to unwanted temptation and about the breadth of what you can study as an economist. Before telling you about my work, I want to step back and share the story of how I became interested in the undismal science of economics. Like many people, my first encounter with economics was as an undergraduate when I took an introductory course as a freshman. And in truth, I found the material quite difficult to reconcile with my life experience. Standard economic models assume that we make perfect decisions, like robots, and we never make bad choices. I'll call these perfect decision makers econs, to borrow a term from our session organizer, Dick Thaler. As a freshman in college, I made lots of bad decisions. I stayed out too late, I ate too much unhealthy food, I put off work until right before deadlines, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. My peers seemed similarly flawed. In short, we were humans, not econs. We resembled closely one of my favorite TV characters of all time, Liz Lemon from NBC's former hit show 30 Rock. This is Liz. In case you aren't familiar with her persona, she's a 30-something exec who works too much, exercises too little, and is generally a disaster when it comes to self-control. She's also a bit of a ditz. She's very human, but not much like an econ. Happily, when I got to graduate school, I discovered the subfield of economics dubbed behavioral economics, which is devoted to understanding real people like me and Liz Lemon, documenting our systematic imperfections, and incorporating them into standard economic models. The work I'll tell you about today is in this tradition. So with that introduction, I'd like to tell you about an idea for helping people like Liz Lemon. And to do that, I'd like to make two plausible assumptions about Liz. First, assume Liz wishes she exercised but lacks the willpower. And second, assume she has a thing for trashy novels but feels guilty wasting her time reading junk. I'm going to tell you about an idea for solving both of Liz's problems at once that I call temptation bundling. The idea is simple. What if Liz only allowed herself to read trashy novels while exercising at the gym? She'd stop wasting time at home on literary garbage and start craving trips to the gym to find out what happens next in her latest thriller. Not only that, but she'd enjoy her novel and her workout more combined. She won't feel guilty reading the novel, and time will fly at the gym. Now, as important as it is to increase exercise and reduce wasted time, temptation bundling can solve lots of other self-control problems as well. For instance, imagine you crave juicy hamburgers and also have a difficult Aunt Tilly who you should spend more time with. What if you only let yourself go to your favorite burger joint with Aunt Tilly? You'd spend less time eating hamburgers when you should be dieting and more time with Aunt Tilly. This one will help the men in the audience in particular. What if you only let yourself get a pedicure while catching up on reading for class? Or for everyone, only watch the next episode of your favorite TV show while catching up on household chores. These are all examples of ways that temptation bundling can solve two problems at once. But an important question, of course, is, does it work? To find out, my collaborators and I conducted an experiment. We recruited participants who belonged to our university's gym, wanted to exercise more, and owned iPods. And we randomly assigned them to one of two experimental conditions. Participants who were assigned to the temptation bundling condition were given a preloaded iPod that had 4 tempting audio novels on it that they had chosen. These are books that it's incredibly difficult to stop reading once you've started. So think The Hunger Games and The Da Vinci Code. Participants then completed a 30-minute workout at the start of our study while listening to the beginning of one of these tempting audio novels. And then we told them if they wanted to hear what happened next, they'd have to come back to the gym where we would be holding their novels and this iPod in a locked, monitored locker that they could only access when exercising. Participants in our control group were also encouraged to exercise more and also completed a 30-minute workout at the start of our study. But instead of receiving an iPod preloaded with a tempting audio novel, instead they received an equally valued gift certificate to Barnes & Noble. For the first 7 weeks following our intervention, participants in the temptation bundling group exercised significantly more than those in the control group, which is great news. Then along came Thanksgiving break. Participants went home, probably ate a lot of turkey, apparently forgot about their audio novels, and when they came back, the effect was gone. So on the one hand, this is neat because it suggests that wanting to know what happens next in your novel is really driving our effects, since we know that forced separation reduces cravings. But it also means we have more work to do to figure out how to re-engage people with temptation bundling after time away from the gym. Okay, another question we wanted to answer in this study was whether or not people actually value temptation bundling. Or in the words of Liz Lemon's profit-hungry boss, Jack Donaghy, will anyone pay for it? To find out, at the end of our study, we told participants that if they wanted, they could pay us to take away their iPods preloaded with tempting audio novels that they could otherwise access freely and lock them at the gym in a monitored locker for a month so they could only use them when exercising. In other words, would they pay us to take away access to a possession they could otherwise use as they pleased? This should strictly be value destroying unless people have self-control problems, recognize it, and are looking for solutions. In fact, we found that more than 60% of participants in our study wanted to pay us to take away their iPods containing tempting audio novels and lock them at the gym so they could only access them when exercising, suggesting lots of demand for temptation bundling devices. So you can imagine a company like Netflix, let's call it Gymflix, that lets you set aside certain TV shows for gym-only access. My research suggests that programs like this might be very popular. Okay, let's turn back for a minute to thinking about economics. What this research, combined with other work from behavioral economics, highlights is that first, humans lack self-control, and second, they seek remedies to their self-control problems, like temptation bundling. So we're beginning to get a clearer picture of how we can improve on standard economic model to incorporate real human foibles. Okay, let's turn back now to research on the imperfections of people like Liz Lemon, and how we can help them tackle temptation. Some of my research has highlighted that another strategy can be helpful, which is prompting people to form plans to follow through on their intended good behaviors. So imagine for a moment that Liz Lemon wants to go to the gym tomorrow. We could use a planning prompt to try to help her by asking her a question like, Liz, when do you plan to go to the gym tomorrow? This might help her follow through for a few reasons. First, the back and forth may embed her intention more deeply in memory. Second, by telling me a specific time when she intends to go to the gym, now when she looks at her watch tomorrow, she may have a cue when she sees that time that this is what she meant to do. And finally, procrastination will now be more difficult because it will require putting off an explicit commitment or breaking an explicit commitment rather than a vague intention. To find out whether or not planning prompts actually work, I partnered with a Midwestern utility company that was holding free on-site flu shots for its employees and hoped to increase employee turnout. They typically sent a standard reminder mailing letting employees know the dates and times when they could get a flu shot on site, as well as the location. When we compared these standard mailings experimentally with new mailings that were nearly identical except for one important feature. They prompted employees to write down the date and time when they intended to get a flu shot. Now note, these are not appointment cards. You're not mailing this back to anyone. You're being prompted to fill this out in the privacy of your own home. No one else will see it. But we thought that this might help people follow through on their intention to get flu shots for the same reason that asking Liz when she planned to go to the gym might help her out. We randomly assigned thousands of employees to receive one of these two different versions of our mailing, and then looked at who turned up to get a flu shot. And what we see is a significantly higher turnout rate among employees who received our planning prompt than those in the control group who received a standard reminder. And actually, this difference between the groups was more than doubled in size when we look at sites that were holding one-day-only flu shot clinics, where the costs of forgetfulness are particularly large. So turning back to our improving model of economic decision-making, this research points to the fact that humans are forgetful and that they benefit from planning. All right, what else can we say about strategies for and barriers to tackling temptation? Well, some researchers have postulated that it may be the case there are some conditions under which it's harder for us to tackle temptation than others. And in particular, there's some evidence that it's harder for us to tackle temptation when we're tired or fatigued. To test this possibility in one high-stakes setting, I partnered with a large company that tracks the hand hygiene decisions made by hospital caregivers. Hand hygiene in hospitals is critical to patient safety. But at the end of a long workday, it may be tempting to cut corners on hand hygiene, particularly given how exhausting it can be to focus on primary healthcare tasks. The data that we used to test the hypothesis that fatigue might creep in and lead to reduced compliance was a data set collected by a company called Preventix that uses RFID technology to track every time caregivers enter or exit patient rooms and whether or not they comply with hand hygiene guidelines. We analyzed 13 million instances of compliance decisions. And what we found is that, consistent with our hypothesis, over the course of the day, hand hygiene declines precipitously. And in fact, this decline occurs faster the more intense a caregiver's work shift. These findings have huge implications for patient safety and for healthcare costs. But if we hadn't recognized that humans were imperfect, it wouldn't have been possible to document this effect. Now, armed with this knowledge, we can begin trying to tackle the problem. So turning back to our improving and evolving model of human decision-making, we can add to the list of imperfections that we get tired. This research also highlights that our motivation to do the things we should and tackle temptation is not a universal constant. It waxes and wanes. And so that begs the question of when, not only within the course of a day, but over the course of a year, are we the most motivated to tackle temptations and pursue our goals? This is the last set of research papers that I'll summarize for you today on this topic. The question I just posed might have had a natural answer for you. You might have thought, the beginning of a new year, that's when we're most motivated to tackle temptation. After all, it's January 3rd, and you're probably starting to get lots of questions about your own New Year's resolutions. And we all know that at the start of a new year, people redouble their efforts to achieve their goals. And in fact, 40% of Americans make New Year's resolutions. There are many potential reasons for this, including the desire to follow the crowd. But I'll argue that part of what's going on is that at the beginning of a new year, we feel that we have a clean slate. Our 2014 failures now feel far behind us, and 2015 stretches out, full of promise. We feel more capable and optimistic as we look forward. My research has shown it's not just the start of a new year when we have these fresh start feelings. We also feel this way at the start of other new cycles, like the beginning of a new week or a new month, or following holidays and birthdays. Don't just take my word for it, let me show you some data though. This is a study I ran with undergraduates where we looked to see whether or not those same undergraduates, the same person, would be more likely to go to the gym following fresh starts. And what we see is that undergraduates visit the gym more frequently at the start of new cycles, like the beginning of a new week, month, year, following holidays, the start of a new semester, and following birthdays, with the notable exception of 21st birthdays. And I'll let you speculate as to why that might be the case. We also see that searches for the term diet on Google are higher earlier in the week, month, year, and following holidays. And we see a fresh start effect when we look at goals set on the goal-setting website stick.com, where you can create a goal and put money on the line that you'll forfeit if you fail to achieve that goal. People create more goals earlier in the week, month, year, following holidays, and following birthdays. And importantly, this is the case not just for health-related goals like losing weight, but also for health-irrelevant goals about things like finance and education. So it's not just that we overeat on the weekends and holidays and then feel the need to trim down at the beginning of a new cycle. There's something deeper going on here. Together, this research suggests that there may be a real opportunity to encourage positive behavior change following fresh starts. So I teamed up with some collaborators to see whether or not we might be able to convince employees who weren't currently saving for retirement to start saving following fresh start moments and using this insight. We sent mailings to employees encouraging them to start saving, letting them know all they had to do was fill out a simple form to either start saving now or following the fresh start of their next birthday. And all they had to do in order to enroll was check a box on this form, sign their name, and put the form back in a pre-addressed, pre-stamped envelope. We compared these fresh start mailings with nearly identical mailings that also allowed employees to start saving now or at an equivalent time delay, but this time no mention was made of the employee's birthday. And we randomly assigned nearly 2,000 non-savers to receive these two different versions of our mailing. When we look at retirement savings contribution rates among these non-savers in the following 9 months, what we see is that the group that received our birthday fresh start mailing is significantly more responsive to our mailing than the control group. This may be driven by the fresh start effect or by the salience of aging that was induced by our birthday mailing, but it certainly suggests that there's potential in the idea of using fresh starts to promote positive behavior change. So one more thing that we can add to our improving economic model of humans. It turns out that humans are particularly motivated to pursue their goals at the outset of new cycles, and we should incorporate this into our models. All right. Hopefully you enjoyed some of the things I've shared with you today, found some of them a little bit curious, but you might be saying to yourself at this point, all right, it's all interesting, but who cares? Why does any of this really matter? And there are a lot of answers I could give you to that question, but the one that motivates me the most is that by improving our models of economic decision-making agents, we can really potentially do a lot of good in the world. This graph, I think, does a nice job of illustrating the potential. As this highlights, bad decisions like smoking, eating too much unhealthy food, and ignoring our doctor's orders have a huge, huge negative impact on society. 40% of premature deaths are attributable to these kinds of bad decisions. But if economists could better understand real human mistakes and human decision making, maybe we could start developing policies that would allow us to shrink this portion of the pie. Another major social problem is undersaving for retirement, and bad decisions almost certainly contribute to this. So maybe, if we could better understand human or Liz Lemon-like decision making, we could help solve this problem as well. Let me wrap up by highlighting a couple of key takeaways. I hope you'll remember that we can use experiments and hypothesis-driven analyses of big data to find out all sorts of fascinating things about human decision-making that allow us to make economic models ever more useful. Second, as you think about how to help yourself and others tackle temptation, I hope you'll remember what I've said about the power of temptation bundling, planning prompts, fresh starts, and avoiding fatigue. In conclusion, I hope that by giving you a taste of behavioral side of economics, I've helped convince you that it is indeed a very undismal science worth further exploration. Thank you.
I think we'll take questions at the end so that we make sure we get through everything. So don't go anywhere.